The flight attendant's hand trembles as she reaches for the phone. Behind her, Margaret Wilson's perfectly manicured finger points accusingly at the black teenager settling into seat 3A, first class, leather upholstery, champagne service. "That boy doesn't belong here," Margaret hisses, loud enough for nearby passengers to turn. "Check his ticket. Call security. Now." The boy, barely 15, meets Margaret's gaze across the aisle, his eyes reflecting not fear but something far more devastating, recognition. He's seen this before. 3 minutes later, 2 airport police officers board the plane, their hands resting casually near their holsters. The cabin falls silent, that particular hush that occurs when collective shame and morbid curiosity collide. Margaret straightens her designer blazer, vindication warming her chest. Until Captain James Reynolds steps out from the cockpit, his 6'4" frame blocking the aisle, his voice cutting through the tension. "Margaret, that's my son." But to understand how we got here, how a respected philanthropist from Connecticut found herself publicly dismantled by her own prejudice, how a decorated pilot's family was thrust into a spotlight they never sought, and how Flight UA 773 from Chicago to New York became the backdrop for a reckoning that would change multiple lives forever, we need to go back to that morning. Back to when the day still held promise for everyone involved. Before you continue this journey with us, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Join our community where stories that matter unfold every week, stories that challenge perspectives and open hearts. Now let's rewind the clock 6 hours. 6:45 a.m. The Wilson Estate in Greenwich, Connecticut. Morning light spills across imported marble countertops as Margaret sips her precisely prepared latte, one shot, oat milk, no foam. At 62, she maintains the same disciplined routine that helped her build Wilson Charitable Foundation from a small family trust to one of the Northeast's most influential philanthropic organizations. The Wall Street Journal lies open beside her iPad, both competing for her divided attention. "Charles, did you confirm the car service?" she calls out, not looking up from the quarterly reports illuminating her screen. Numbers tell stories more reliable than people, Margaret has always believed. And these numbers tell her that her foundation's inner-city music program is underperforming against metrics. Charles Wilson appears in the kitchen doorway, bow tie slightly askew beneath his salt and pepper beard. At 65, he settled comfortably into semi-retirement from his cardiology practice, now serving on hospital boards and playing golf while Margaret continues charging forward, collecting accolades and influence. "Already done, Maggie? Driver will be here at 8. "Plenty of time to make your flight." He approaches, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Are you sure I can't convince you to delay until tomorrow? We could both attend the symphony gala tonight." Margaret sighs, covering his hand with hers briefly before returning to her iPad. "The New York board won't reschedule again. Besides, Meredith has spent weeks preparing for this presentation." She glances up, offering a practiced smile. "I'll be back tomorrow evening." Front row seats for T. Tchaikovsky's Fourth, just as promised. Charles nods, accustomed to compromise after nearly 4 decades of marriage. He moves to pour his own coffee, Grateful Dead t-shirt visible beneath his unbuttoned dress shirt, a small rebellion against the formality that defines their public life. "At least you're flying first class. Those upgrades are the only good thing to come from all this travel." "Comfort matters when you're building something meaningful," Margaret replies, a well-worn justification. She closes her iPad and stands, smoothing invisible wrinkles from her tailored slacks. "I need these inner-city programs to work, Charles. The foundation's reputation. My reputation depends on measurable outcomes." Across town, in a modest colonial on the less prestigious side of Greenwich, another morning routine unfolds with considerably more chaos. Captain James Reynolds checks his flight credentials while simultaneously flipping pancakes and mediating an argument between his twin daughters about a borrowed, or possibly stolen, sweater. "Ladies, enough," he says, his deep voice carrying natural authority that works better in the cockpit than in a house full of teenagers. "Zoe, return Chloe's sweater. Chloe, next time ask before borrowing Zoe's history notes." Problem solved. The 14-year-old twins exchange identical looks of exasperation before dissolving into reluctant laughter. James smiles, transferring pancakes to plates with the same precision he applies to every aspect of his life. 22 years as a commercial airline pilot has instilled in him a reverence for procedure, for checklists, for getting the small things right so the big things don't go wrong. "Dad, is Marcus really flying back with you today?" Zoe asks, drowning her pancakes in syrup. "That's the plan. His program ends at noon, and I've got him booked on my Chicago to New York route. 3 months is too long without seeing my boy." Pride warms James's voice. At 47, he's built his life around two passions, flying and family. After losing his wife Karen to cancer 6 years ago, those priorities crystallized even further. Did Mom's sister say why she couldn't keep him longer? Chloe asks, scrolling through her phone while absent-mindedly eating. James sighs, leaning against the counter. Aunt Vivian loves Marcus, but he's 15 and a handful, the twins chorus together, giggling. Academically gifted handful, James corrects with a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. This Chicago music program was perfect for him. Intense, focused, surrounded by kids who share his passion for classical piano, but now it's time to come home. He doesn't add what they all know, that Marcus's brilliance comes with complications, that being a young black man with outspoken opinions and exceptional talent creates friction in spaces not designed for him. That his son navigates worlds James himself never had to consider at that age. James checks his watch, pilot's habit, and claps his hands. Bus in 20 minutes, ladies, and Mrs. Hernandez will be here after school. I should be home with Marcus around 8 tonight. As his daughters race upstairs, James scrolls through his phone to a text from his son sent late last night. Dad finished box partita number 2. Wait till you hear it. Change the fingering on the third movement. My teacher nearly had a stroke, but even she admitted it works better. See you tomorrow, first class, right? Kidding, economy is fine. James smiles, typing back, first class confirmed. Perks of being the pilot's kid. Proud of you. See you at the gate. He pockets his phone, checks his uniform in the hallway mirror, and allows himself a moment of anticipation. Having all 3 children under one roof again, even briefly, feels like a victory against the entropy that has defined his life since Karen's death. In downtown Chicago, morning arrives with a symphony of car horns and elevated train rumblings. Marcus Reynolds sits alone in the bay window of his temporary home, fingers moving silently over imaginary piano keys on the windowsill. At 15, he's all angles and potential, long limbs, serious eyes, and hands that his instructors call once in a generation. The modest apartment belongs to his mother's sister, Aunt Vivian, a music professor at Northwestern who agreed to host him during the prestigious summer program. Photographs cover nearly every surface. Marcus's mother Karen in her wedding dress, Marcus at his first recital, the twins blowing out birthday candles. A family geography mapped across frames. You're up early, Vivian says, entering the living room in a colorful caftan, her silver dreadlocks piled atop her head. Nervous about flying home? Marcus's hands still. Not nervous about flying, Dad's the best pilot in the fleet. But, Vivian prompts, settling beside him on the window seat, but I'm not sure I'm ready to leave. Here I'm just another music student. There I'm. The black kid who plays classical piano in Greenwich, Connecticut. Vivian finishes, her tone gentle but unflinching. Marcus nods, resuming his silent fingering practice. Last semester, my music theory teacher suggested I might be more comfortable focusing on jazz. I hadn't even mentioned jazz. Vivian sighs, placing her hand over his, stilling his movement. Your mother faced the same assumptions. She used to say that every time she picked up her cello, she was making a statement whether she wanted to or not. I just want to play. To be good, not good for a black kid, just good. Marcus turns to face his aunt. These past 3 months, I've been challenged, pushed. Nobody cared about anything except the music. And you think going home means losing that? Vivian asks. I know it does. Marcus stands, stretching to his full height, nearly 6 feet already. Dad tries to understand, but he can't, not really, and the twins live in their own world. Vivian rises too, adjusting her glasses. Your father flies planes across the country with hundreds of lives in his hands. Trust me, he understands responsibility and excellence. She checks her watch. Speaking of which, you need to finish packing. Your father's flight lands at 11 and yours takes off at 2. Marcus nods, heading toward his temporary bedroom. He pauses in the doorway. Thanks, Aunt Vive, for everything. Play for me before you leave, one last time in my living room. Marcus smiles, a rare, unguarded expression that transforms his serious face. Bach. Always Bach, Vivian confirms. As Marcus disappears into his room, Vivian picks up a photograph of her sister, Karen, touching the glass gently. He's so much like you, she whispers. Brilliant and complicated and carrying burdens he shouldn't have to. At O'Hare International Airport, the morning rush creates its own peculiar rhythm. Thousands of individual journeys converging, diverging, each traveler the protagonist of their own story. Margaret Wilson strides through Terminal 1, rolling carry-on trailing precisely 2 steps behind her. She's dressed for both comfort and impression, cashmere sweater, tailored pants, pearls that once belonged to her mother. The exclusive first-class lounge welcomes her with subdued lighting and attentive service. Margaret checks her watch, a Cartier, Charles's gift for their 30th anniversary, and settles into a leather armchair, arranging her belongings with methodical precision. Mrs. Wilson, what a pleasant surprise. Margaret looks up to find Richard Danforth, fellow Greenwich resident and CEO of an investment firm that manages part of her foundation's endowment. He stands before her, martini in hand despite the early hour. Richard, she acknowledges with a practiced smile. Chicago for business or pleasure? Bit of both, he replies, taking the seat across from her without invitation. Met with some potential investors, caught the Cubs game yesterday, heading back to civilization now. He sips his drink. And you, another fundraising conquest. Margaret bristles slightly at his tone but maintains her smile. Program evaluation for our music initiative. The foundation sponsors talented youth from disadvantaged backgrounds. Richard nods, only half listening. Admirable work, as always. You know, my Melissa is on the symphony board now. She mentioned your generous donation. Supporting the arts is essential, Margaret replies automatically, a statement she's made at countless galas and donor dinners. Indeed, though between us, Richard lowers his voice conspiratorially, I sometimes wonder if these inner-city programs truly appreciate classical music or if they're just checking boxes for scholarships. Margaret feels a flicker of discomfort but doesn't challenge him. Instead, she glances at her watch again. If you'll excuse me, Richard, I have some calls to make before boarding. As she moves to a quieter corner of the lounge, Margaret pushes away the nagging sensation that Richard's comment should have bothered her more than it did. After all, isn't she dedicated to expanding access to the arts? Doesn't her foundation literally exist to create opportunities for underprivileged youth? Yet as she scrolls through emails, Margaret finds herself reviewing the disappointing metrics from the Chicago program. Low retention rates, inconsistent attendance, minimal parental involvement. Perhaps Richard's skepticism isn't entirely unfounded. Perhaps some cultural divides can't be bridged simply by throwing money at them. Elsewhere in the same terminal, Captain James Reynolds moves with confident purpose through employee security checkpoints. Fellow crew members greet him with genuine warmth. James has earned respect not through rank but through consistent competence and unflappable calm during his 2 decades with the airline. Captain Reynolds, calls out First Officer Diane Chen, falling into step beside him. At 34, she's part of a new generation of pilots, and James has taken pleasure in mentoring her over their 3 years flying together. Ready for our Chicago to New York hop? More than ready, James replies. My son's joining us on the return flight. He's been at a music program here all summer. The piano prodigy, right? Diane smiles. You've only mentioned him about 100 times. James laughs, acknowledging the gentle teasing. Guilty as charged, it'll be good to have him home. They enter the staff briefing room where the rest of the crew has assembled, flight attendants reviewing service protocols, the second officer checking weather patterns. James transitions seamlessly into captain mode, commanding attention without raising his voice. Good morning, everyone. Flight UA 773 to LaGuardia, departure scheduled for 2:15 p.m. Current weather shows clear conditions both here and in New York, though we're monitoring some potential turbulence over Pennsylvania. Standard flight time of 2 hours and 7 minutes expected. As James continues the briefing, his phone vibrates in his pocket. A quick glance shows a text from Marcus. Program director wants me to play at the closing ceremony. Might cut it close for the flight. Don't leave without me. James feels a twinge of concern but pushes it aside. The schedule is tight but manageable. Marcus knows the importance of punctuality. It's been drilled into him since childhood, a non-negotiable value in a pilot's household. Meanwhile, in a practice room at the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra building, Marcus sits alone at a Steinway grand piano, eyes closed, fingers dancing across the keys. Bach's Partita No. 2 fills the space, complex, mathematical, precise. This is where Marcus finds peace in the architecture of notes that follow immutable patterns. The music makes sense in a way people often don't. The door opens quietly, and Dr. Alina Phillips, program director, slips in. She listens, her expression thoughtful, until Marcus reaches the end of the movement. Your father will be proud, she says simply. Marcus startles slightly. He hadn't noticed her entrance, so deep was his concentration. Dr. Phillips, I was just warming up for the ceremony. You were communing with Bach, she corrects with a smile. There's a difference. Your interpretation has matured even over these 3 months, the patience in your phrasing. She shakes her head, impressed. Have you considered what we discussed, about applying to pre-college programs at Juilliard or Curtis? Marcus closes the piano lid gently. I've thought about it. It's complicated. Because of your father? Because of everything. Marcus stands, suddenly seeming older than his 15 years. My mom was the musician in the family since she died. Music is how I keep her with me, but it's also what took her away, all those tour concerts. Dr. Phillips nods, understanding. Corinne Reynolds was exceptional. I heard her perform Elgar with the Boston Symphony before you were born. Dad keeps her cello in a glass case in our living room, Marcus says quietly. Sometimes I catch him just staring at it. He never says anything, but I know he's thinking about how she loved it more than anything. Perhaps not more than she loved you and your sisters, Dr. Phillips suggests gently. And perhaps your father's concern isn't about the music itself, but about watching you follow a path that's both brilliant and difficult. Marcus shrugs, unconvinced. The closing ceremony ends at 12:30. My flight's at 2:15. Dr. Phillips accepts the change of subject. We've arranged a car service to take you directly to the airport afterward. You're our finale, Marcus. Leave them with something they'll remember. As she departs, Marcus reopens the piano, his fingers finding the keys without conscious thought. This time he plays not Bach but Chopin, Nocturne in C-sharp minor, his mother's favorite piece, the last one she performed publicly before her illness took even that away from her. Back at O'Hare, the first-class lounge gradually fills as departure time approaches. Margaret Wilson has positioned herself strategically. Back to the wall, view of both entrances, power outlet accessible for her devices. Years of navigating donor events and board meetings have taught her the value of controlling her environment whenever possible. Her phone rings, Meredith, her assistant in New York. Margaret, good morning. Just confirming you received the updated presentation materials I sent. Reviewing them now, Margaret replies, though the files remain unopened in her email. The retention numbers concern me, Meredith. We're investing substantial resources in this program with questionable returns. A brief pause on the line. The qualitative feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. The students report increased confidence, improved academic performance. Feelings don't secure continued funding, Margaret interrupts. Hard data does. We need measurable outcomes, not anecdotes about confidence. Another pause, longer this time. There's something you should see before making any decisions. One of the students, a 15-year-old named Marcus Reynolds, has made extraordinary progress. His instructor believes he could be concert level within a few years. Margaret makes a noncommittal sound. One success story doesn't justify the entire program budget. Perhaps not, Meredith concedes. But sometimes a single example illustrates potential better than statistics. I've included a video of his recent performance in the materials. Just watch it before tomorrow's meeting, please. After ending the call, Margaret sits motionless for several moments. Throughout her career, she's prided herself on objective decision-making, on not being swayed by emotional appeals. The Foundation's mission is structural change, not individual charity cases. Yet something in Meredith's tone gives her pause. With reluctant curiosity, Margaret opens the email attachments, scrolling past spreadsheets and executive summaries until she finds the video file. She connects her AirPods and presses play. The video shows a school auditorium, clearly in an underfunded district, scuffed floors, outdated lighting. A slender black teenager walks to the piano with quiet confidence. No introduction, no fanfare. He simply sits, takes a breath, and begins to play. The transformation is immediate. Bach's complex counterpoint fills the space, the boy's fingers moving with precision and passion that belie his age. Margaret, who attends the symphony monthly and considers herself knowledgeable about classical music, finds herself leaning closer to the screen. There's something in his playing, a maturity, a depth of understanding that can't be taught. When the piece ends, the camera catches the boy's expression, not pride or exhilaration, but something more profound. A moment of perfect peace, immediately replaced by self-critical focus as he stands to acknowledge the applause. Margaret removes her AirPods, disturbed in a way she can't immediately articulate. The Foundation's Chicago program was designed to provide cultural enrichment, to expose underprivileged students to fine arts they might otherwise never experience. It was not intended to unearth prodigies. The teenager's talent complicates her narrative, the clean, satisfying story of wealthy benefactors bestowing opportunity upon the deserving poor. This boy doesn't need her charity. He needs a stage. The boarding announcement for first-class passengers interrupts her thoughts. Margaret gathers her belongings methodically, tucking away both her iPad and her unsettled feelings as she heads toward the gate. At that same moment, Captain James Reynolds completes his pre-flight checks in the cockpit of the Boeing 737 that will carry them to New York. Each switch, each instrument, each procedure performed with practiced precision, a ritual that centers him no matter what personal concerns might be swirling beneath his professional exterior. Primary checklist complete, he confirms to First Officer Chen. How's our passenger count looking? Nearly full in economy, 8 out of 12 in first class, Chen replies, scanning the manifest. Including one Reynolds, Marcus. Looks like your son made it after all. James allows himself a small smile. Good, he was cutting it close with a performance this morning. He doesn't add that he'd been checking the passenger list repeatedly, concern growing as boarding time approached without Marcus's name appearing. Like father, like son, performing under pressure, Chen remarks. Except he creates beautiful music while we just try not to hit mountains. James laughs, tension easing from his shoulders. Slightly different skill sets, slightly different consequences for mistakes. Outside the aircraft, the final boarding process unfolds with controlled chaos. Margaret Wilson settles into seat 2C, arranging her limited belongings with efficient movements. First class is her small reward to herself, a sanctuary from the noise and inconvenience of commercial travel. 3 rows behind her in economy, a flight attendant assists an elderly woman with her seatbelt. A toddler squalls as his ears begin to feel pressure changes. A businessman loudly argues on his phone until the cabin manager pointedly reminds him of airplane mode requirements. Margaret silently congratulates herself on the decision to upgrade. As the boarding process nears completion, a commotion at the front of the plane draws attention. A breathless teenager rushes onto the aircraft, backpack slung over one shoulder, a hardshell music case clutched in his opposite hand. "I'm so sorry," he apologizes to the unamused gate agent following him. "The car service got caught in traffic and then security was backed up. You're the last to board," the agent cuts him off. "Seat assignment." Marcus Reynolds catches his breath, standing straighter. 3A first class. Margaret, overhearing this exchange, glances up with mild interest that quickly shifts to something else. A momentary confusion, a recalibration of expectations. The boy is clearly rushing from some event, dark jeans, button-down shirt with sleeves rolled up, curly hair slightly disheveled. Not the typical first-class passenger. The flight attendant checks his boarding pass twice before nodding. "Right this way, sir." Marcus moves down the aisle, conscious of the curious glances, the subtle shift in energy his presence creates in the first-class cabin. He's accustomed to being the exception, the unexpected element in carefully curated spaces. He finds his seat, directly across the aisle from Margaret, and carefully stows his precious cargo in the overhead compartment. "Can I help you with your backpack, sir?" the flight attendant asks. "No, thank you. I'll keep it with me." Marcus slides into his seat, keeping the backpack on his lap like a shield. Margaret watches this interaction with growing curiosity. The boy is poised despite his rushed entrance, polite but reserved. The music case suggests he might be a student returning from some competition or program. Yet something doesn't align in her assessment. The first-class seat, the worn backpack, the confidence that seems both natural and hard-won. As pre-flight announcements begin, Margaret returns her attention to her iPad, dismissing the brief curiosity. The plane begins its pushback from the gate, the familiar safety demonstrations playing on overhead screens. In the cockpit, James Reynolds guides the aircraft with the same sure hands that once taught his son to ride a bicycle, to tie his shoes, to find middle C on the piano. He doesn't know that Marcus sits in first class, that his son is being subtly but unmistakably evaluated by the woman across the aisle, or that the next 2 hours will upend multiple lives in ways none of them can predict. The aircraft accelerates down the runway, wheels lifting from tarmac as it rises into the afternoon sky. Chicago recedes below, the city's grid growing smaller until it resembles an elaborate circuit board. Thousands of connections, pathways, intersections where lives collide in both harmony and discord. For now, the passengers of Flight UA 773 exist in the peculiar limbo of air travel, temporarily removed from their regular lives, suspended between destinations, sharing space with strangers they would otherwise never encounter. Most will arrive in New York having exchanged nothing more than polite nods with their seatmates. But for 3 people on this flight, a respected philanthropist, a gifted teenager, and the pilot who connects them in ways not yet revealed, this journey will become the dividing line between before and after. The moment when assumptions crumble, when privilege faces its reflection, when the careful distance between charity and justice collapses into something far more complicated and true. The fastened seatbelt signs illuminate overhead as the plane climbs through a pocket of turbulence. The real turbulence, however, remains ahead, set in motion by choices made long before anyone boarded this flight, waiting to envelop them all. The aircraft levels at cruising altitude, that subtle shift in engine pitch signaling to experienced travelers they've reached their temporary plateau above the clouds. The seatbelt sign dings off, and the first-class cabin springs into its well-choreographed service routine. Flight attendants move with practiced efficiency, distributing warm towels, taking drink orders, transforming the sterile environment into something approximating luxury. Margaret accepts her sparkling water with a lemon twist. Never alcohol during business travel. A rule she established decades ago when male colleagues often used liquid courage as an excuse for both poor decisions and unwanted advances. She arranges her workspace precisely. Tablet on the right, phone on the left, complimentary nuts untouched in the center. A system, always a system. Across the aisle, Marcus slides his backpack beneath the seat and accepts a ginger ale, thanking the flight attendant with the formal politeness his father instilled in him. Please and thank you aren't optional in the Reynolds household. Their armor, his father explained once. In a world quick to misconstrue a black teenager's confidence as defiance, impeccable manners create a narrow margin of safety. Margaret finds her attention repeatedly drawn to the boy. Something about him seems familiar, though she's certain they've never met. Perhaps he resembles someone, a scholarship recipient from one of her foundation's programs, or the son of an acquaintance. The music case, now safely stowed in the overhead bin, suggests a connection to the arts, her primary philanthropic focus. Professional curiosity, she tells herself. Nothing more. The teenage boy catches her glance and offers a brief, neutral smile before returning to the book in his hands, a worn paperback with its spine creased in multiple places. Margaret notices it's Richard Feynman's. Surely you're joking, Mr. Feynman? Not typical teenage reading material. That's an unusual choice for someone your age, she remarks before fully considering whether the observation might be received as condescending. Marcus looks up, his expression guarded. My dad gave it to me. He says Feynman understood both science and art, that they're just different languages describing the same world. The sophistication of his response catches Margaret off guard. Your father sounds like a thoughtful man. He is. Marcus turns slightly toward her, the universal body language of tentative engagement. He's a pilot, actually. How interesting. Margaret's response is automatic, the same tone she uses at fundraisers when trapped in conversations of obligation rather than interest. For this airline? Marcus nods. 22 years. That must have been difficult during the pandemic, Margaret offers, making the minimal effort required by social conventions. It was. Marcus doesn't elaborate, turning back to his book in a clear signal that the exchange has concluded. Margaret feels a flicker of irritation at the dismissal. She's accustomed to people, especially young people, seeking to prolong conversation with her once they recognize her name or position. Her foundation's scholarship programs are highly competitive, her influence in cultural circles significant. Yet this boy seems entirely indifferent. The flight attendant returns, addressing Marcus with the deference reserved for first-class passengers. Mr. Reynolds, would you like a snack before our meal service begins? No, thank you, Marcus replies. Just another ginger ale when convenient, Mr. Reynolds. The name registers with Margaret, connecting to something just beyond her immediate recall. Reynolds. Where has she heard that name recently? She unlocks her iPad, returning to the email from Meredith about the Chicago music program. The video she'd watched in the lounge, the talented pianist. What was his name? Scrolling through the report, she finds it. Marcus Reynolds, 15, exceptional progress, potential for concert-level performance. Margaret glances across the aisle with new interest. If this is the same boy and the coincidence seems too great for it not to be, then he's a direct beneficiary of her foundation's generosity. A success story she could potentially leverage in tomorrow's board presentation. Excuse me, she says, more deliberately engaging now. I couldn't help overhearing your name. Are you by any chance Marcus Reynolds from the Chicago Youth Symphony summer program? Marcus looks up, surprise evident in his expression. Yes, how did you know that? Margaret straightens, a practiced smile appearing. What a remarkable coincidence. I'm Margaret Wilson. My foundation funds that very program. Recognition dawns in Marcus's eyes, though not the appreciative warmth Margaret expects. Instead, a careful neutrality settles over his features. The Wilson Foundation. Yes, Dr. Phillips mentioned your organization several times. And how did you find the experience? Valuable, I hope. Margaret's tone carries the unmistakable note of benefactor to beneficiary, the powerful seeking validation for their generosity. Marcus considers his response carefully. The instructors were excellent. The resources, too, access to proper practice facilities makes a significant difference. He pauses. Though I understand the program may lose its funding. Margaret's smile tightens almost imperceptibly. We're evaluating outcomes across all our initiatives. Resources aren't unlimited, even for philanthropy. We need to ensure we're making impactful investments. Impactful, Marcus repeats, a slight edge entering his voice. And how exactly do you measure the impact of music education? Standardized testing, income potential, college acceptance rates? The challenge in his tone is unmistakable, and Margaret feels herself shifting into the defensive posture she adopts during difficult board meetings. Multiple metrics, actually. Attendance consistency, parental involvement, academic improvement, long-term retention. But not actual musical development? Marcus interrupts, then immediately looks down as if regretting the outburst. Of course that's considered, Margaret replies smoothly, though in truth artistic progress ranks low on their evaluation criteria. The Foundation's official mission emphasizes practical outcomes and measurable life improvements. Language carefully crafted for donors who want assurance their money isn't being wasted on abstractions like artistic expression. An uncomfortable silence settles between them, punctuated by the steady hum of the aircraft engines. Margaret considers returning to her reports, ending this unexpectedly tense exchange. Yet professional instinct, the same instinct that's guided her through decades of navigating delicate donor relations, tells her to salvage the interaction. This boy could still be useful for her presentation. I actually watched a video of you performing, she offers, her tone deliberately softened. Box partita, very impressive for someone your age. Marcus looks up, genuinely surprised. You watched me play? Yes, just before boarding. My assistant included it with some program materials. Margaret leans slightly toward him, adopting her mentor persona. You have obvious talent, the kind of natural ability that should be nurtured. There's nothing natural about it, Marcus replies, his voice quiet but intense. I practice 4 hours daily every day since I was 6 years old. Margaret blinks, recalibrating. Of course, I didn't mean to suggest otherwise. Hard work is essential to any achievement. But you called it natural ability, Marcus persists. People always do that with certain talents, especially when... He stops himself again, turning to look out the window at the endless carpet of clouds below. Margaret follows his unfinished thought, especially when I'm black. The unspoken words hang between them, and Margaret feels a flush of discomfort. She hadn't meant anything by the comment, certainly nothing racial. She uses the same praise for all talented young people in her programs. I apologize if I offended you, she says, the words stiff with the unfamiliarity of apology. I simply meant to compliment your playing. Marcus turns back, his expression unreadable. Thank you for funding the program, Mrs. Wilson. Whatever metrics you're using, I hope you understand what it means to students like me. Not just the opportunity, but the recognition that we belong in these spaces, too. The comment lands with unexpected weight. Before Margaret can formulate a response, the captain's voice comes through the overhead speakers, a routine announcement about expected turbulence ahead. But Margaret notices Marcus straighten at the sound, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds speaking. We're expecting some light chop as we pass over Pennsylvania. Nothing concerning, but I've turned on the seatbelt sign as a precaution. Flight attendants, please prepare the cabin. The voice, confident, warm, authoritative, triggers something in Margaret's memory. Reynolds. The boy's father is a pilot for this airline. Captain Reynolds, a coincidence. She glances at Marcus, who meets her gaze with a hint of pride evident in his expression. That's my dad, he confirms, answering her unasked question. Your father is flying this plane, Margaret clarifies, surprised by this additional connection. Marcus nods. He's been flying the Chicago-New York route for about 5 years now. I've been staying with my aunt in Chicago for a music program. Today I'm finally heading home. The new information forces Margaret to reassess the boy before her. Not just a scholarship recipient from her foundation's program, but the son of their aircraft's captain. The incongruity disturbs her ordered sense of the world, her mental categorization of who occupies which spaces and why. And he arranged for you to fly first class. The question emerges before she can filter it, carrying an undercurrent of suspicion. Marcus's expression cools immediately. Yes, Mrs. Wilson, that's how airline family benefits work. When space is available, immediate family can be upgraded. Of course, Margaret acknowledges, recognizing her misstep too late. I wasn't suggesting. It's fine, Marcus cuts her off, returning to his book. The brief opening in his careful reserve has closed completely. The aircraft shudders slightly as they encounter the promised turbulence. The flight attendants suspend their service, securing carts and taking their seats. In the momentary disruption, Margaret retreats to her iPad, discomfited by the exchange but unable to pinpoint exactly why. She opens her presentation for tomorrow's board meeting, reviewing slides that highlight the Foundation's commitment to diversity and inclusion. Photos of smiling black and brown children holding musical instruments, carefully curated quotes from grateful parents, pie charts showing the demographic breakdown of program participants. All evidence of the Wilson Foundation's dedication to expanding cultural access beyond traditional boundaries. Yet the living embodiment of that mission sits across from her, and their interaction has been anything but the neat success story she packages for her donors. Marcus Reynolds doesn't fit the narrative she's constructed. He's neither sufficiently grateful nor comfortably categorizable. He occupies first class not through her benevolence, but through his father's professional achievement. He approaches classical music not as an enriching exposure provided by her charity, but as his birthright, his inheritance, his chosen discipline. The turbulence subsides, the cabin service resumes, and Margaret forces her attention back to her presentation. Yet her concentration has fractured, her thoughts returning repeatedly to the boy across the aisle and the unsettling questions his presence raises about the very foundations of her philanthropic work. In the cockpit, Captain James Reynolds adjusts the aircraft's heading slightly to avoid a weather system appearing on their radar. Beside him, First Officer Chen handles communications with air traffic control, their teamwork wordless and efficient after years of flying together. "Your son seemed to make it on board just in time," Chen remarks during a lull in their duties. "Terminal traffic was brutal today." James nods, checking their position on the navigation display. "Marcus has never been late for anything important in his life, gets that from his mother." A fleeting smile crosses his face. "Though I imagine he cut it close knowing him, probably wanted to play one more piece before leaving. He's in first class, right? Seat 3A. Chen asks, reviewing the passenger manifest. "Lucky kid. Benefits of the job," James replies. "Besides, he's earned a little luxury. 3 months of intensive study, 4 public performances, youngest student in the advanced placement. He's worked hard." Chen smiles. "You never stop being proud of them, do you? My parents are the same way. My mother still carries around my 5th grade math award in her purse." James laughs. "I understand your mother completely. When the twins won their science fair last year, I showed the photos to complete strangers in the supermarket checkout line." Their easy conversation pauses as James notices a notification on the flight management system. "Looks like we'll be starting our descent a bit earlier than planned. LaGuardia's backing up with afternoon arrivals. Let's begin preparations." As James guides the aircraft toward its gradual descent, he's unaware of the tension building in the cabin behind him. The interaction between his son and a woman whose charitable foundation has unwittingly complicated his child's relationship with his own talent. In first class, the meal service concludes as Marcus politely declines dessert. Margaret notices that he's barely touched his food, moving it around the plate in the universal signal of distraction rather than appetite. She recognizes the behavior from countless charity galas where she herself has performed the same ritual, maintaining appearances while mind and emotions are elsewhere. The flight attendant clears their trays, and Marcus returns to his book, though Margaret observes that he hasn't turned a page in several minutes. His expression has grown increasingly distant, a familiar adolescent retreat into the protective shell of silence. An unexpected pang of empathy surfaces in Margaret. Despite her earlier discomfort, she finds herself wanting to bridge the silence between them. Perhaps it's maternal instinct awakened by his obvious youth, or perhaps it's the professional diplomat in her, unwilling to leave any interaction unresolved. "Do you have siblings?" she asks, opting for neutral territory. Marcus looks up, surprise momentarily replacing guardedness. "Twin sisters, they're 14. "Ah, twins," Margaret smiles. "That must be lively." "Charles and I have just one daughter, Elizabeth. She's at Yale now, pre-law." "My sisters are into science," Marcus offers after a brief hesitation. "Zoe wants to be a marine biologist. Chloe's obsessed with astronomy." "And you chose music," Margaret observes. "Was that influenced by your mother? You mentioned earlier that your father is the pilot." Something shifts in Marcus's expression, a subtle tightening around the eyes, a vulnerability quickly masked. "My mother was a cellist. Boston Symphony Orchestra for 11 years. The past tense registers immediately with Margaret, and she softens her approach instinctively. "That's quite an accomplishment." "She died when I was 9, Marcus continues, his voice matter-of-fact in the way of children who have learned to state painful truths without crumbling beneath their weight. "Cancer." "I'm very sorry," Margaret responds, the words inadequate but sincere. Marcus nods, accepting the condolence with practiced grace. "Music is how I keep her with me. She taught me piano first when I was 4. Said every musician should understand piano fundamentals even if they eventually choose another instrument." "She sounds like a remarkable woman," Margaret offers, finding herself genuinely interested now rather than strategically engaged. "She was." A small smile touches Marcus's lips. "She would have loved the Chicago program, actually. All those hours of intensive study, master classes with professional musicians. It was her kind of environment." The mention of the program returns them to the underlying tension, but Margaret chooses to navigate away from potential conflict. "And your father supported your participation even though it meant being away from home for the summer." "Dad understands dedication." Marcus replies. His job requires the same kind of focus, the same attention to detail, different skills but similar mindset. He hesitates, then adds, he rearranged his flight schedule to make this work, took extra routes to Chicago so he could visit on layovers. This additional glimpse of the family's dynamics further complicates Margaret's perception. The image forming is not of a disadvantaged youth rescued by philanthropic intervention, but of a committed family making sacrifices to nurture exceptional talent, a narrative that parallels her own parenting journey with Elizabeth. The realization is disorienting. Margaret has spent decades cultivating a particular worldview, one where her wealth and influence create opportunities that wouldn't otherwise exist, where her foundation stands as a bridge between underprivileged potential and fulfilled promise. Yet Marcus's story suggests a different reality, one where her foundation's support, while helpful, is merely supplemental to a foundation already built by a family's love and commitment. The flight attendant approaches with an apologetic smile. Mrs. Wilson, I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's an issue with your connecting flight to Hartford. The captain asked me to inform you personally. Margaret shifts into efficiency mode, temporarily setting aside the unsettling revelations. What sort of issue? Weather delays at Bradley International. They're expecting your connection to be delayed by at least 3 hours. Captain Reynolds thought you might want to consider alternatives before we land. Margaret sighs, calculating the implications. A 3-hour delay would mean missing dinner with Charles, arriving at their Greenwich home well past midnight. Are there other options? Perhaps Amtrak from New York? I'll check on train schedules, the flight attendant assures her. The captain also mentioned that if you prefer, he could radio ahead and have the airline arrange a car service from LaGuardia to Greenwich. It might be faster than waiting for the connection. The personalized attention is unexpected. That's very thoughtful of Captain Reynolds. Please tell him I appreciate the consideration. As the flight attendant departs, Marcus watches the exchange with curious interest. My dad does that sometimes, he explains. Tries to solve problems before they become problems. Occupational habit, I guess. It's good customer service, Margaret acknowledges, impressed despite herself. It's more than that for him, Marcus replies, a hint of defensiveness entering his tone. He genuinely cares about people being comfortable, feeling looked after. Even strangers. Before Margaret can respond, the overhead announcement system activates again. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Reynolds. We've begun our initial descent into the New York area. Current weather at LaGuardia shows clear conditions, temperature 72 degrees. We're expecting a smooth approach, but as always, please remain in your seats with seatbelts fastened. Flight attendants, prepare for landing in 20 minutes. The familiar routine of descent begins, tray tables secured, seats returned to upright positions, personal belongings gathered and stowed. The rhythm of air travel, consistent across all flights, providing structure to the liminal space between destinations. Marcus closes his book, carefully placing it in his backpack. His movements are precise, methodical, the same focused attention Margaret observed in his piano performance video. She finds herself wondering what music plays in his mind during these mundane moments, what complex patterns his fingers might be tracing invisibly against the armrest. Will someone be meeting you at LaGuardia? She asks, realizing this may be their final exchange before landing. Just Dad after he completes his post-flight duties, Marcus answers. We'll take the crew shuttle to the terminal together. Margaret nods, processing this additional glimpse into their lives, the easy coordination of a family accustomed to navigating the complexities of a pilot's schedule. Well, it was interesting meeting you, Marcus. I wish you continued success with your music. The platitude feels hollow even as she speaks it, inadequate to the complexity of their interaction. Marcus seems to sense this too, his response carefully neutral. Thank you, Mrs. Wilson, and thank you again for your foundation's support of the program. A flight attendant approaches, addressing Marcus with professional courtesy. Mr. Reynolds, your father asked me to check if you need anything before landing. I'm fine, thank you, Marcus replies. Could you tell him everything's good and that I finished the Feynman book he lent me? Of course. The flight attendant smiles warmly, and Margaret notices the easy familiarity, not the deference of service staff to a first-class passenger, but the friendly connection of colleagues extending to a team member's family. As the flight attendant moves away, Margaret feels a subtle shift in the cabin's social dynamics. The boy across from her isn't just another passenger. He's connected to the authority figure piloting the aircraft, to the crew serving the cabin. He belongs here in ways that transcend the ticket that granted him access to first class. The realization brings with it an uncomfortable question. What other spaces has she mentally categorized as outside this boy's rightful domain? What other barriers has she unconsciously enforced through her assumptions? The aircraft begins its more pronounced descent, the pressure change causing subtle discomfort in passengers' ears. Outside the windows, the expansive geography of New York comes into view, the distinctive patterns of boroughs and waterways, the dense concentration of Manhattan skyscrapers, the sprawling networks of highways connecting center to periphery. Margaret reaches for her phone, sending a quick text to Charles about her delayed connection and the possibility of alternative transportation. As she does, a notification appears, a news alert about a protest at Yale, Elizabeth's University. Student activists demanding the renaming of a residential college, currently honoring a historical figure with controversial racial views. The juxtaposition of this news with her current situation strikes Margaret forcefully. Her daughter likely supports such protests. Elizabeth's politics have grown increasingly progressive during her college years, sometimes leading to tense dinner table discussions when she returns home. Yet here sits Margaret, uncomfortably aware that her own unexamined assumptions about who belongs where might not withstand her daughter's scrutiny. The aircraft descends through cloud cover, momentary turbulence causing minor jostling. Marcus grips his armrests briefly, a reflexive response, before consciously relaxing his hands. Margaret notices the pianist's fingers, long and dexterous, capable of spanning octaves and executing complex passages. Hands that connect him to his mother's legacy, to artistic traditions centuries old. "Are you nervous about landing?" she asks, misinterpreting his temporary tension. Marcus shakes his head, a small smile appearing. "Never, not with my dad flying. I know exactly what's happening during every phase of flight. He's been explaining the mechanics to me since I was little. Right now he's managing our approach angle while monitoring crosswinds. Routine stuff for him." The pride in his voice is unmistakable, and Margaret finds herself envying the simple certainty of his faith in his father's abilities. Her own relationship with Elizabeth has grown more complicated as her daughter matures, challenging family traditions and questioning the sources of their privilege. "That's a special kind of confidence," Margaret observes, "to trust someone so completely." "It's not blind trust," Marcus corrects. "It's based on evidence." 22 years, thousands of flights, perfect safety record. Plus, I've watched him handle emergencies, like when my mom was in the hospital and he had to balance his flight schedule with being there for her treatments. He never crashed, literally or figuratively. The aircraft descends further, Manhattan now clearly visible through the port side windows. The flight attendants make final preparations, checking that all passenger seatbelts are secured, all electronic devices stowed. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're making our final approach into LaGuardia Airport," the lead flight attendant announces. "Please make sure your seatbelts are fastened, your seats are in the upright position, and all personal items are securely stowed beneath the seat in front of you or in the overhead compartments." The familiar litany continues as the plane banks gently, aligning with the runway. Margaret has experienced this sequence hundreds of times throughout her business travels, yet today it carries different significance. The man guiding them safely to the ground is not an anonymous pilot, but a father, a widower, a man who rearranged his professional schedule to support his son's musical development. If you're still watching my video, you're probably wondering how this confrontation on an airplane turns into something meaningful. I promise you, the story we're unfolding is about more than a misunderstanding. It's about the moments that force us to see beyond our carefully constructed worldviews. If you're enjoying this journey, please subscribe to our channel and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. Are you Team Margaret or Team Marcus so far? Now, let's return to our story as Flight UA 773 touches down in New York, where the real turbulence is about to begin. The wheels of the Boeing 737 make contact with the runway, that distinctive chirp of rubber meeting asphalt followed by the controlled deceleration of thrust reversers and brakes. The passengers rock forward slightly with the momentum, then settle back as the aircraft taxis toward its assigned gate. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to LaGuardia Airport. Local time is 4:22 p.m. and the temperature is 72 degrees. Please remain seated with your seatbelt fastened until the captain has turned off the fasten seatbelt sign. This will indicate that we have parked at the gate, and it is safe for you to move about the cabin." Margaret gathers her belongings efficiently, preparing for a swift exit to arrange her alternative transportation to Connecticut. Across the aisle, Marcus remains seated, in no hurry to disembark. Of course, he'll wait for his father to complete his professional responsibilities. The seatbelt sign dings off, and the predictable rush begins, passengers standing immediately despite the flight attendant's pleas for orderly deplaning, overhead bins opening, the shuffle of bodies eager to reclaim their autonomy after hours of enforced stillness. Margaret rises, retrieving her carry-on from the overhead compartment with practiced ease. She offers a polite nod to Marcus. "Goodbye, Marcus. Best of luck with your music." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilson," he replies, his expression unreadable. "Good luck with your foundation." The subtle emphasis on your isn't lost on Margaret, a gentle reminder that philanthropy, however well-intentioned, creates its own power dynamics. She moves toward the exit, joining the slow procession of first-class passengers being thanked by flight attendants as they depart. As Margaret steps into the jet bridge, she realizes she's forgotten to ask the flight attendant about transportation alternatives. Turning back toward the aircraft entrance, she sees a flight attendant already engaged with another passenger and decides to wait momentarily. Through the open door, she observes Marcus still seated, now checking his phone. Another flight attendant approaches him, leaning down to speak quietly. Marcus nods, gathering his backpack and standing. The attendant retrieves his music case from the overhead bin with special care, handling it as the precious cargo it is. Margaret steps aside as a group of businessmen exit, creating a momentary obstruction in the jet bridge. When her line of sight clears again, she notices Marcus has moved to the front of the cabin. He stands near the cockpit door, a controlled eagerness in his posture. The cockpit door opens, and Captain Reynolds emerges, tall, distinguished in his uniform, his bearing conveying both authority and approachability. Margaret recognizes the voice she's heard over the announcement system, now given physical form. What happens next strikes her with unexpected force. Captain Reynolds spots Marcus, and his serious expression transforms instantly into unrestrained joy. He steps forward and embraces his son with complete unself-consciousness, a display of affection remarkable for both its openness and its setting. "There he is," Captain Reynolds exclaims, holding his son at arm's length to look at him properly. "Right on time, as promised. The closing ceremony ran long," Marcus explains, his usual reserve melting away. "Dr. Phillips wouldn't let me leave until I played the entire Bach suite." "Of course she wouldn't," the captain laughs. "I wouldn't have either. How'd it go?" "Clean execution, but the emotional dynamics could have been better. I rushed the third movement." "You always say that," Captain Reynolds responds, affection evident in his tone. "I bet it was brilliant." He takes the music case from the flight attendant. "Corinne's favorite piece. She'd have been so proud, Marcus." The interaction feels intensely private, yet Margaret cannot look away. The casual mention of Marcus's mother, Corinne, makes her a tangible presence in this moment, in this metal tube suspended between places and possibilities. Captain Reynolds notices her standing in the jet bridge and offers a professional smile. "Thank you for flying with us today. I hope you had a pleasant journey." "Yes, thank you, Captain," Margaret responds automatically. "Your son and I were actually seatmates, well across the aisle." Something shifts in Captain Reynolds' expression, a subtle recalibration. "Is that right? Small world." He glances at Marcus, who gives an almost imperceptible nod, some private communication passing between them. "I'm Margaret Wilson," she continues, extending her hand. "My foundation sponsors the music program Marcus attended in Chicago." Recognition dawns in the captain's eyes as he shakes her hand. "Ah, the Wilson Foundation. Marcus has mentioned your organization's support. It's been an incredible opportunity for him." "You have a very talented son," Margaret offers, the words feeling simultaneously true and inadequate. "Thank you," Captain Reynolds replies, his hand moving to rest on Marcus's shoulder. "We're tremendously proud of his dedication." The exchange feels stilted, laden with unspoken contexts. Margaret finds herself searching for something more meaningful to say, some way to acknowledge the complexity of their unexpected connection. "The program evaluations have been quite positive overall. I'm reviewing them for our board meeting tomorrow, actually." Captain Reynolds' expression remains politely interested, but Margaret detects a hint of reservation. "I hope the Foundation continues its support. Programs like these make a significant difference." "That's exactly what we're assessing," Margaret responds, falling into her professional persona. "Impact measurement is crucial for sustainable philanthropy." A flight attendant approaches, addressing Captain Reynolds. "Excuse me, Captain, but dispatch is asking for the final flight log before you go off duty." "Of course, I'll be right there." He turns to Marcus. "Wait for me at the crew exit and we'll head home together." "Actually, Dad," Marcus interjects, "I was hoping to speak with Mrs. Wilson a bit more about the Foundation's metrics for the music program. She mentioned they're reviewing the funding." Surprise registers on Captain Reynolds' face, followed by careful neutrality. "If Mrs. Wilson has time, of course." All eyes turn to Margaret, who finds herself caught off guard by the request. Yes, I suppose I have some time before arranging my transportation to Connecticut." Speaking of which, Captain Reynolds adds, I asked about your connection. There's a car service available if you'd prefer not to wait for your delayed flight. The airline can arrange it as a courtesy given the circumstances. That's very kind, thank you, Margaret acknowledges. Not at all, customer care is part of the job. He turns to Marcus. I'll find you when I'm finished with the paperwork. With a final nod to Margaret, he returns to the cockpit. Margaret and Marcus stand in momentary silence, an unexpected interval neither had anticipated. The jet bridge continues to fill with deplaning passengers, creating a flow that naturally moves them toward the terminal. You wanted to speak about the program metrics? Margaret prompts as they walk. Marcus nods, his expression earnest. I know fundraising depends on showing results, but I'm concerned that the current metrics don't capture what actually matters about music education. The directness of his approach is startling. Margaret had expected perhaps some personal appeal, not a critique of her foundation's evaluation methodology. And what do you think matters, Marcus? Growth that can't be measured in standardized assessments, he replies without hesitation. The confidence to interpret a piece differently than your teacher suggests, the resilience to practice the same passage 100 times until it's right, the discipline to choose practice over hanging out with friends. They emerge into the terminal, the sudden expansion of space and increase in ambient noise creating a momentary disorientation. Margaret adjusts the strap of her bag on her shoulder, buying time to formulate a response. Those are admirable qualities, she acknowledges, but difficult to quantify for donors who want concrete results. More difficult maybe, but not impossible, Marcus counters. What if you followed students for years instead of months? Track their academic performance, college acceptance rates, career success, even for those who don't become professional musicians. Margaret studies him with growing curiosity. This is not the conversation she expected to have with a 15-year-old in an airport terminal. That sounds like a longitudinal study. Those are expensive and time-consuming. So is training musicians, Marcus responds simply. But the results last a lifetime. Before Margaret can reply, a commotion erupts behind them. A security officer approaches rapidly, accompanied by an airline representative in a blazer. Excuse me, the officer calls out, his hand moving to rest near his holster. We need to speak with that young man. Marcus freezes, his body language shifting instantly from engaged advocate to wary defender. Margaret turns in confusion. What seems to be the problem? The airline representative steps forward, her expression professionally concerned. We've had a report of a possible unauthorized person in the first-class cabin, someone who may have boarded with an invalid ticket. Margaret blinks in disbelief. There must be some mistake. Ma'am, please step aside, the security officer instructs firmly. Sir, I need to see your boarding pass and identification. Marcus's face has gone completely still, a mask of careful neutrality that strikes Margaret as far too practiced for someone so young. He reaches slowly into his pocket, retrieving his phone. My boarding pass is digital, and I have school ID, but I'm only 15. I don't have a driver's license yet. The security officer takes the phone, examining the boarding pass with obvious skepticism. This shows first class. How did you pay for this ticket? I didn't, Marcus answers truthfully. It's an employee family benefit. My father is Captain James Reynolds, the pilot of this flight. The officer exchanges glances with the airline representative, doubt evident in their expressions. We'll need to verify that. Can you call your father? He's completing post-flight procedures, Marcus explains, his voice steady despite the tension evident in his posture. You can check with any of the flight crew. They all know me. Sir, please come with us while we sort this out, the officer insists, his hand still resting near his weapon. Margaret watches this exchange with growing horror, the situation unfolding with a terrible familiarity she's seen in countless news stories but never witnessed firsthand. The ease with which this boy, this brilliant, thoughtful boy, has transformed from person to suspect in the eyes of authority figures sends a chill through her. This is ridiculous, she interjects, stepping forward. I was seated across from him for the entire flight. He is exactly who he says he is. The airline representative offers an apologetic smile that doesn't reach her eyes. I'm sorry for the inconvenience, ma'am, but we need to follow protocol. Someone reported concerns about an unauthorized person in first class. A terrible realization dawns on Margaret. She remembers her own fleeting thought when Marcus first boarded, that momentary recalibration of expectations, that subtle surprise at seeing him in first class. Had someone else on the flight harbored similar thoughts but acted on them? Had someone reported this boy simply for occupying a space they didn't think he belonged in? Who made this report? Margaret demands, her philanthropist's authority emerging in her tone. I'd like to know specifically what concerns were raised. The security officer straightens, responding to her obvious social status. "Ma'am, I don't have that information. We're simply responding to an alert from gate staff." Marcus stands absolutely still, his eyes fixed on some middle distance, neither challenging nor submitting, a posture that speaks of careful calculation. Margaret recognizes with sickening clarity that this is not his first experience with unwarranted suspicion. "This young man is the son of our pilot," Margaret states firmly. "I sat across from him in first class. He belongs there as much as I do. More perhaps since his father is actually flying the plane while I'm merely a passenger." The officer hesitates, glancing at his colleague. Before they can respond, a voice cuts through the tension, authoritative, controlled, but with an undercurrent of barely contained fury. "What exactly is happening here?" Captain James Reynolds approaches, still in full uniform, captain's bars gleaming on his shoulders. His expression is professionally neutral, but his eyes are sharp with awareness. "Captain Reynolds," the airline representative begins, recognition and discomfort crossing her face simultaneously. "There was a report about a possible unauthorized passenger in first class. We're just following standard procedure." Captain Reynolds steps beside his son, his presence creating an almost visible shield. "This is my son, Marcus Reynolds. He was traveling on a family benefit ticket, first class, which I personally arranged and which was approved through all proper channels." The security officer's demeanor shifts subtly. "Of course, Captain, we're just doing our job. Someone reported concerns and we're required to investigate." "And what exactly were these concerns?" Captain Reynolds asks, his tone deceptively calm. The airline representative and security officer exchange uncomfortable glances. Neither answers directly. "I believe," Margaret interjects, her voice cutting through the awkward silence, "that someone may have made assumptions based on inappropriate criteria." Captain Reynolds turns to her, reassessing her role in this situation. Recognition flickers in his eyes, understanding that she's attempting to help, however belatedly. "Marcus has been a passenger on my flights dozens of times," he states, returning his attention to the officers. "He has never been stopped or questioned before. I would very much like to know what prompted this particular investigation." The silence stretches, uncomfortable and revealing. "If there's nothing further," Captain Reynolds continues, "my son and I will be leaving now, unless you intend to detain us without cause." The challenge is clear and the security officer steps back. "No, sir, sorry for the misunderstanding." "I don't believe there was any misunderstanding," Captain Reynolds replies evenly. "I believe there was a misuse of security protocols based on racial profiling, and I will be following up formally through appropriate channels." He turns to Marcus, his voice softening. "Let's go home, son." Marcus nods, his expression still carefully controlled. As they begin to walk away, he pauses and turns back to Margaret. "Thank you for speaking up, Mrs. Wilson." The simple acknowledgement lands with unexpected weight. Margaret nods, words failing her in this moment. Captain Reynolds gives her a measured look, not gratitude, exactly, but recognition of her intervention. As they walk away, Margaret stands motionless in the terminal, surrounded by the oblivious flow of travelers continuing their journeys uninterrupted. The confrontation has lasted less than 5 minutes, yet she feels fundamentally altered by it, as though witnessing the incident has forced her to see with painful clarity what had previously existed at the edges of her awareness. Her phone vibrates with a message from Charles, a reminder about tomorrow's schedule, about the Foundation board meeting where she'll present her evaluation of the Chicago music program. The program that gave Marcus Reynolds the opportunity to develop his extraordinary talent. The program she was considering recommending for reduced funding based on metrics that, as Marcus pointed out, fail to capture what truly matters. Margaret watches Captain Reynolds and his son disappear into the crowd, the distinctive white uniform and the music case creating a visual anchor until they're swallowed by the terminal's human current. Father and son, navigating a world that continues to question their presence in spaces they have earned through talent, dedication, and professional excellence. The flight attendant approaches, apologetic. "Mrs. Wilson, the car service to Greenwich has been arranged, courtesy of the airline. It's waiting at the east exit whenever you're ready." "Thank you," Margaret responds automatically, her mind still processing the scene she's just witnessed. "I'll be there shortly." As the attendant leaves, Margaret remains still, her carefully ordered worldview undergoing a seismic shift. Her philanthropic work has always been predicated on the belief that she is helping to open doors for the less fortunate. Yet Margaret now confronts an uncomfortable truth. Some doors remain closed not because of lack of opportunity or ability, but because of persistent, insidious assumptions about who belongs where. Captain Reynolds didn't need her foundation to create opportunities for his son. He needed a world that wouldn't question his son's right to occupy the spaces his talent and family had earned him access to. A world Margaret herself had momentarily doubted existed when she questioned how a boy like Marcus ended up in first class. The weight of this realization settles around her shoulders like a heavy cloak. Tomorrow's board meeting looms in her mind, transformed from routine evaluation to moral crossroads. The metrics, the presentations, the carefully curated narratives of her foundation's impact, all of it suddenly seems insufficient, even disingenuous in light of what she's witnessed today. Margaret retrieves her phone and dials her assistant in New York. "Meredith, I need you to make some changes to tomorrow's presentation. Significant changes." She pauses, gathering her thoughts. "And please find out everything you can about longitudinal studies of music education outcomes, particularly as they relate to non-musical skills development." She ends the call and finally moves toward the exit, her steps purposeful. The encounter with Marcus and his father has lasted less than an hour of her life, yet Margaret senses it will influence every hour that follows, every decision she makes about her foundation, every assumption she questions, every space she occupies and takes for granted. As she steps outside into the New York afternoon, Margaret understands that she has been granted something precious and uncomfortable: the opportunity to see beyond the boundaries of her own experience, to recognize her complicity in systems she's never had to question, and perhaps to begin the difficult work of genuine allyship rather than mere charity. The town car waits at the curb, driver holding the door open expectantly. Margaret pauses before entering, looking back at the terminal where lives intersected briefly but significantly, where a 15-year-old boy stood his ground with dignity while the world once again questioned his right to exist in spaces not historically designed for him, where his father's quiet fury and controlled response spoke volumes about battles fought repeatedly throughout his life and career. "Mrs. Wilson," the driver prompts. "To Greenwich." "Yes," Margaret confirms, sliding into the backseat. "To Greenwich. I have a board meeting to prepare for." The evening light fades to dusk as Margaret's town car crosses the Connecticut state line. Traffic thickens near Stamford, the familiar congestion of commuters returning to bedroom communities after Manhattan workdays. Margaret barely notices. Her mind remains at LaGuardia, replaying the scene that unfolded with disturbing clarity. Marcus's careful stillness as the security officer approached, Captain Reynolds's controlled fury, her own belated intervention. "Mrs. Wilson," the driver's voice breaks through her thoughts. "Would you prefer the Merritt Parkway or I-95 from here? There's construction on the Merritt, but I-95 shows accidents near exit 5. "Whichever you think best," Margaret answers, uncharacteristically indecisive. Normally, she would have a definite opinion, would have already checked traffic patterns on her phone, would have optimized even this small segment of her day. Tonight, such concerns feel trivial. The driver nods, taking the I-95 ramp. "Should be about 40 minutes to Greenwich, depending on traffic." 40 minutes. Margaret checks her watch, a habit so ingrained she performs it without consciousness. Nearly 6:30 p.m. By now, Captain Reynolds and Marcus would be heading home too, perhaps already reunited with the twin sisters Marcus had mentioned. What conversations were happening in their car? How many times had Marcus experienced such confrontations? How did his father help him process them? The questions tumble through her mind, unanswerable yet insistent. Margaret has spent decades cultivating certainty in her professional judgments, her philanthropic priorities, her social position. Yet tonight, certainty feels not just elusive but suspect, a luxury afforded by never having her presence questioned in spaces she takes for granted. Her phone rings, Charles calling from home. "Maggie, where are you? I thought your flight landed hours ago." "Connection issues," she explains, keeping details minimal. "The airline arranged a car service. I'm on I-95 now, should be home before dinner." Good, because Mrs. Peterson called from the symphony board. Apparently there's some issue with the guest conductor for next month's performance. She's convinced only you can resolve it. Margaret makes an acknowledging sound, her attention still fragmented. "Maggie, are you listening? This is the T. Tchaikovsky program you've been looking forward to all season." "Yes, of course," she responds automatically. "I'll call her tomorrow." "Is everything all right? You sound distracted." Margaret considers the question, weighing the comfortable evasion against the complicated truth. "Something happened at the airport. I witnessed an incident. A young black man being questioned by security for no legitimate reason." "Ah," Charles's voice softens with recognition. "That's always upsetting to see." "It was more than upsetting, Charles, it was." Margaret searches for words adequate to the experience. "It was illuminating and shameful, because for a brief moment when I first saw him board, I had the same question they did. Why is he in first class?" The admission cost her something to voice aloud, even to her husband of nearly 40 years. A pause on the line. We all have those moments, Maggie. The important thing is recognizing them. Is it? Margaret challenges, surprising herself with the sharpness in her tone. Is recognition enough when these moments translate to real harm for people like Marcus? Marcus, the boy on the plane. He's 15, Charles, 15 and already practiced at handling suspicion. He's a classical pianist, extraordinarily talented. His father is an airline captain with 22 years of experience, and none of that protected him from being treated like a criminal for simply occupying space in first class. Charles absorbs this information. I understand why you're upset, but you said yourself you intervened. You did the right thing. Too late, Margaret counters, and only after benefiting from all the assumptions that worked in my favor and against him. No one questioned my right to be there. The car slows as traffic condenses around an accident ahead. Red brake lights stretch into the distance, creating a momentary visual metaphor for blockage, for barriers, for progress halted. This is affecting you deeply, Charles observes, his tone careful. More than I would have expected. The comment strikes Margaret as both perceptive and obtuse. It should affect everyone deeply, but we're insulated, aren't we? We can treat these incidents as unfortunate news stories rather than lived reality. Another pause. Does this have something to do with your foundation board meeting tomorrow? Is this boy connected to one of your programs? Yes, Margaret confirms. The Chicago Music Initiative, but that's not why. She stops, recalibrating. Or perhaps it is, in a way. I was evaluating that program based on metrics that completely miss what matters. I was ready to recommend reduced funding because the numbers didn't tell the story I wanted. And now I'm not sure about anything except that I've been asking the wrong questions. Charles sighs, the sound familiar after decades of marriage. It's his response when Margaret's intensity exceeds his comfort, loving but slightly overwhelmed. We can discuss this more when you get home. I've made reservations at La Grenouille for 8:30. I thought you might enjoy a nice dinner after your travel day. The mention of their favorite French restaurant, with its hushed atmosphere, impeccable service, and $200 prix-fixe menu, suddenly strikes Margaret as absurd in its disconnection from the day's revelations. Let's stay in tonight, she suggests. I'm not in the mood for a restaurant. If you're sure, Charles responds, surprise evident in his voice. Margaret never cancels plans, especially not high-end restaurant reservations. I'll let them know. Drive safely, dear. The call ends, and Margaret returns to the window, watching Connecticut's affluent suburbs pass in the gathering darkness. Street lamps illuminate manicured lawns, colonial facades, luxury vehicles in circular driveways. Greenwich appears ahead, their community for 35 years, chosen for its excellent schools, cultural amenities, and proximity to both New York and Charles's former medical practice. Margaret has always considered Greenwich home. Tonight, she sees it through altered perspective, as a fortress of privilege, a carefully maintained enclave where certain questions need never be asked because the answers are predetermined. Where do you belong? Here, if you can afford it. Who deserves access? Those who can pay the price of admission. The car turns onto her street, where historic homes sit back from the road on generous lots. The Wilson estate appears ahead. Georgian architecture, mature landscaping, discreet exterior lighting highlighting architectural features. Their home for 3 decades, the physical manifestation of their success and stability. The driver slows at the security gate, waiting as it swings open in recognition of the car's approach. The irony doesn't escape Margaret. How smoothly she passes through barriers designed specifically to control access, to keep certain people out and let others in. We've arrived, Mrs. Wilson, the driver announces, pulling up to the front entrance. Thank you. Margaret gathers her belongings, suddenly eager to escape the confines of the vehicle, to shower away the travel day, to process her thoughts in privacy. Charles appears in the doorway as the car departs, silver hair catching porch light, Brooks Brothers cardigan and loafers completing the picture of East Coast establishment comfort. His smile is genuine, welcoming, familiar, the same smile that first attracted her during medical school when they were both ambitious students from middle-class backgrounds determined to secure their place in the professional class. Welcome home, he greets her, taking her carry-on. Rough travel day? Margaret allows herself to be embraced, drawing comfort from the ritual of return. You could say that. Inside, their home gleams with subtle luxury, hardwood floors, museum-quality artwork, furnishings selected with the help of a decorator whose client list includes minor European royalty. The spaces flow with intentional elegance, designed for both intimate family evenings and the philanthropic gatherings they host several times a year. I opened a bottle of the Montrachet, Charles informs her, leading toward the kitchen. Thought you might need it after dealing with airline chaos. The kitchen, recently renovated with professional-grade appliances neither of them fully utilizes, gleams with stainless steel and marble. Charles pours golden wine into crystal stemware, a wedding gift from his parents, now valuable antiques. Margaret accepts the glass, taking a small sip of the $300 Burgundy. Under normal circumstances, she would appreciate its complexity, its perfect balance, the story of its terroir. Tonight, it tastes like privilege. "You're still troubled," Charles observes, studying her expression. "I'm questioning things I've never questioned before," Margaret admits. "Our foundation's approach, our metrics, our underlying assumptions about the communities we serve." Charles leans against the counter, cradling his own wine glass. "Maggie, your foundation does tremendous good. You funded arts education for thousands of children who wouldn't otherwise have access. You've supported dozens of cultural institutions through financial crises. Just last month, the governor recognized your contributions to the state's cultural landscape. The litany of accomplishments, usually a source of pride, now rings hollow. What if we've been congratulating ourselves for solving problems we've helped perpetuate? What if our generosity is just another way of maintaining control over who gets access and who doesn't?" Charles blinks, genuinely startled by her vehemence. "That seems unnecessarily harsh. Philanthropy, by definition, is about sharing resources with those who have less. But we decide what they need," Margaret counters. "We decide what success looks like. We decide when funding continues or ends, and we do it all from our perspective, not theirs." "This is about the boy on the plane," Charles says, making the connection. "This Marcus." "It's about much more than Marcus," Margaret insists, setting down her wine glass with more force than intended. "Though yes, meeting him was the catalyst. His talent, his intelligence, his dignity in the face of that security officer, it forced me to see the arrogance in our approach." Charles sighs, moving to the refrigerator. "You haven't eaten since breakfast, have you? Let me make you something while we talk. Your blood sugar is probably crashing after the stress of travel." The medical diagnosis, his default approach to emotional intensity, further irritates Margaret. "This isn't about my blood sugar, Charles. It's about realizing that our foundation's entire evaluation methodology misses what actually matters in arts education." "And what does matter?" Charles asks, genuinely curious despite his discomfort with her intensity. "The immeasurables," Margaret replies, thinking of Marcus's words in the terminal. "Confidence, resilience, discipline, the ability to interpret the world through artistic expression, the experience of mastery. Those are admirable goals," Charles acknowledges, assembling ingredients for a simple meal. "But how do you measure them? How do you convince donors their money is well spent without metrics?" The practical questions, so reasonable, so pragmatic, reflect the fundamental challenge. Margaret moves to the kitchen island, watching as Charles efficiently prepares omelets, one of the few dishes in his cooking repertoire, perfected during their early marriage when they took turns making dinner after long hospital shifts. "I don't know yet," she admits, "but I know our current approach is inadequate. Marcus made me see that." As Charles whisks eggs with mechanical precision, Margaret retrieves her iPad from her carry-on. The foundation board presentation remains open from her earlier review, slides filled with graphs, retention statistics, attendance figures, demographic breakdowns, data points that reduce complex human experiences to quantifiable outcomes. She scrolls to the video file of Marcus performing Bach. Without connecting to speakers, she plays it again, watching his focused expression, his disciplined posture, his hands moving with both technical precision and emotional intelligence across the keyboard. "Is that him?" Charles asks, glancing over as he adds grated cheese to the egg mixture. Margaret nods. "This was recorded at a community performance in Chicago last month. Listen." She raises the volume, allowing Bach's complex patterns to fill their kitchen, mathematical precision infused with profound emotion. Charles pauses in his cooking, giving the performance his full attention. "He's extraordinary," he acknowledges when the piece concludes. "Truly gifted. He's 15, Charles, 15 and already playing at this level. And our foundation was considering reducing funding for the program that helped nurture that gift because parental attendance at workshops didn't meet our arbitrary benchmarks." Charles plates the omelets, adding a garnish of fresh herbs from their kitchen garden. "So adjust the benchmarks. You're the foundation director. That's within your power." "It's not that simple," Margaret protests, accepting the plate he offers. "The entire framework needs reconsideration. And not just by me, but by the communities we serve. We need their voices defining success, not just ours." Charles joins her at the island, his expression thoughtful. "That's a fundamental restructuring of your approach. The board may resist." "Let them," Margaret responds with unexpected conviction. "If today taught me anything, it's that discomfort is sometimes necessary for growth." They eat in contemplative silence, the evening settling around them. Through the kitchen windows, Margaret can see their expansive backyard illuminated by strategic landscape lighting. The tennis court where Elizabeth learned to play, the garden where they host summer fundraisers, the swimming pool rarely used since their daughter left for college. All of it beautiful, exclusive, protected, like their lives, like their perspectives. Until today. "I need to make some calls," Margaret announces, finishing her meal. Meredith is gathering research on longitudinal studies of music education, but I want to speak with Dr. Phillips from the Chicago program directly, and I should review the full participant feedback, not just the executive summary. Charles collects their plates, recognizing the familiar signs of Margaret entering problem-solving mode. "Now, it's nearly 9 o'clock. Education directors frequently work late," Margaret responds, already scrolling through her contacts. "And this can't wait until morning. The board meeting is at 10. As she moves toward her home office, a sun-filled room overlooking the garden designed by the same architect who renovated the Kennedy compound on Martha's Vineyard, Charles calls after her. "Maggie, I'm proud of you for recognizing something that needs to change. That's always been your strength, seeing problems clearly and addressing them directly." Margaret pauses, turning back. "Thank you, Charles, but I should have seen this long before now." That's the problem with privilege. It blinds you to realities others can't escape. In her office, Margaret settles at her desk. An antique partner's desk once owned by a minor British diplomat, purchased at Sotheby's during a phase when collecting historical furniture seemed important. Now it strikes her as another symbol of their carefully curated surroundings, their intentional association with tradition and authority. She dials Dr. Eleanor Phillips, program director of the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra's outreach initiative. The call connects after several rings. "Dr. Phillips speaking. Eleanor, it's Margaret Wilson. I apologize for calling so late, but something urgent has come up regarding our program evaluation." A pause. "Mrs. Wilson, this is unexpected. I understood we'd be discussing the evaluation at next month's site visit." "Plans have changed," Margaret explains. "I met one of your students today, Marcus Reynolds. We were on the same flight from Chicago to New York." "Marcus," surprise colors Dr. Phillips's voice. "How remarkable. He's one of our most promising participants." "Yes, I witnessed his talent firsthand. I also witnessed him being racially profiled by airport security immediately after landing." A heavy silence fills the line. "Unfortunately, I wish I could say I'm shocked. Incidents like that are far too common for our black students, especially the boys." The matter-of-fact response, devoid of the outrage Margaret still feels, speaks volumes about frequency, about normalized injustice. "It was illuminating," Margaret admits. "And it's forced me to reconsider our entire approach to program evaluation. The metrics we've been using, they miss what matters most." "I've been suggesting that since the program's inception," Dr. Phillips responds, a hint of restraint in her tone. The gentle rebuke lands precisely. "Yes, I realize that now. Your quarterly reports consistently emphasized qualitative outcomes our evaluation framework didn't adequately capture. Because spreadsheets can't measure transformation," Dr. Phillips states simply. "They can't quantify what happens when a child masters something they thought impossible. When they discover their own capacity for excellence. When they develop the courage to perform publicly despite knowing they'll often be the only person who looks like them on stage." The words resonate deeply with what Margaret witnessed today, Marcus's composure during the confrontation, his dignity, his resilience. "I want to change our approach," Margaret declares. "I'm presenting to our board tomorrow, and I intend to recommend a complete overhaul of our evaluation methodology. I'd like your input on what meaningful assessment would actually look like from your perspective." Another pause, longer this time. "Are you serious about this, Mrs. Wilson? Because developing authentic assessment takes significant time and community involvement. It's not something we can design on a phone call the night before your board meeting." The challenge is fair, the skepticism earned. "I understand, but I'm committed to beginning the process, even if it's messy and incomplete. Better to start moving in the right direction than continue perfectly down the wrong path." Dr. Phillips considers this. "In that case, I suggest 3 immediate changes. First, extend your evaluation timeline from annual to multi-year. Meaningful artistic development can't be measured in months. Second, include qualitative assessment tools designed with community input. Surveys that ask the right questions rather than the convenient ones. Third, involve program graduates in both design and implementation. They understand what actually mattered to their development." Margaret takes notes, her hand moving swiftly across her leather-bound notebook. "These are excellent starting points. Would you be willing to lead a task force to develop this new framework, with appropriate compensation for your time, of course?" "I would," Dr. Phillips agrees, though I'd insist on co-leadership with program participants and their families. Their expertise is essential. Agreed, Margaret responds, surprising herself with how readily she accepts this power-sharing arrangement. And regarding Marcus specifically, I understand he's considering pre-college programs at Juilliard or Curtis. He mentioned that? Dr. Phillips sounds surprised. Not directly, but I gathered from our conversation that continuing his musical education at the highest level is a priority. It should be. His talent demands it. But there are financial considerations, of course. Even with scholarships, the associated costs, living expenses in New York or Philadelphia, travel, instruments are substantial. Margaret makes another note. I'd like to explore creating a specialized fellowship, not just tuition support but comprehensive funding that eliminates financial barriers entirely, for Marcus and other exceptional students in similar circumstances. That would be transformative, Dr. Phillips acknowledges. Though I should mention that Captain Reynolds is extremely proud. He's declined certain types of assistance in the past, preferring to support his son's development through his own resources whenever possible. The information adds another dimension to Margaret's understanding of the family, their dignity, their self-sufficiency, their determination to succeed on their own terms despite systemic obstacles. I understand, Margaret responds. Any fellowship would need to honor that dignity. It would be about recognizing exceptional talent, not providing charity. A critical distinction, Dr. Phillips agrees, one your foundation hasn't always emphasized in its communications. Another earned critique that Margaret accepts without defensiveness. Our language will change along with our approach, I can promise you that. They continue discussing possibilities until nearly 11 o'clock, Margaret filling pages with notes, questions, and action items. By the time they conclude the call, a framework for genuine transformation has emerged, not a complete solution, but a starting point grounded in humility and partnership rather than benevolent authority. As Margaret reviews her notes, another thought surfaces, incomplete, still forming, but insistent. Her foundation's relationship with the Reynolds family shouldn't end with today's encounter. There's something unfinished, something that requires personal rather than institutional response. She checks the time, too late for a business call, but this isn't business. This is human connection, apology, recognition. She retrieves her phone and dials the airline's corporate office, utilizing the executive contact information she has as a frequent first-class passenger. This is Margaret Wilson. I need to leave a message for Captain James Reynolds, who piloted Flight UA 773 from Chicago to LaGuardia today. It's regarding a personal matter. After navigating several layers of bureaucracy, she succeeds in leaving her contact information with a promise it will reach Captain Reynolds securely. Whether he chooses to respond remains his decision, a small but significant ceding of control that feels right in this context. Margaret finally prepares for bed, her mind still processing the day's events, reorganizing her understanding of her foundation's work, her privilege, her responsibilities. As she moves through her evening routine, cleansing her face with imported products, applying serums that promise to defy time's passage, she studies her reflection with unusual scrutiny. At 62, Margaret Wilson has accumulated all the conventional markers of success: wealth, influence, recognition, a beautiful home, a stable marriage, a daughter thriving at an elite university. She has done good in the world according to her own definition of goodness. She has opened doors according to her own understanding of access. Yet today has revealed the limitations of that understanding, the blind spots in her vision, the inadequacy of her definitions. The reflection staring back at her is both familiar and strange, a woman at a crossroads between comfortable certainty and complicated growth. Charles is already in bed, reading, glasses perched on his nose as he reviews medical journals, a habit maintained since retirement, his way of staying connected to the profession that defined him for 4 decades. Productive call? He asks as Margaret slides beneath Egyptian cotton sheets. Very, she confirms. We're changing course significantly. I'll need to convince the board tomorrow, but I'm prepared for that challenge. Charles sets aside his reading. You seem different since this encounter, Maggie Moore. I don't know, energized, determined. Awake, Margaret suggests after considering his observation. I feel awake to realities I've been privileged to ignore. It's uncomfortable but necessary. Charles reaches for her hand across the expanse of their king-sized bed. I've always admired your moral courage, even when it makes me uncomfortable. Margaret squeezes his hand, grateful for his steady presence through the upheavals of their shared life. I left a message for Captain Reynolds. I'm not sure he'll call back, but I needed to try. What will you say if he does? Margaret considers the question seriously. That I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner, that I recognize my own complicity in systems that threatened his son, that I want to do better not just professionally through the foundation, but personally. Charles nods, understanding the significance of this intention. Get some rest. Tomorrow will be challenging enough without sleep deprivation. As they settle into darkness, Margaret finds herself wondering about the Reynolds household tonight. Are the twins bombarding their brother with questions about his Chicago adventure? Is Captain Reynolds discussing the airport incident with his children, helping them process yet another reminder of the world's persistent inequities? Is Marcus playing piano in their home, finding solace in music after the day's disturbances? These questions follow Margaret into uneasy dreams where she repeatedly tries to board an aircraft but cannot find her seat, cannot prove she belongs, cannot make herself understood by indifferent authorities. Morning arrives with pale October sunlight filtering through custom window treatments. Margaret wakes earlier than usual, her subconscious already preparing for the day's confrontations. She checks her phone immediately. No return call from Captain Reynolds, which doesn't surprise her. In his position, would she return a call from someone who witnessed his son's humiliation and intervened only belatedly? Probably not. She dresses with deliberate care, a charcoal suit that projects authority without ostentation, minimal jewelry, comfortable yet professional heels. Armor for the battle ahead with her board, many of whom share her previous perspectives on philanthropic measurement and evaluation. Charles appears in the doorway as she applies lipstick, a final touch of color in her otherwise monochromatic ensemble. "You're going to face resistance today," he observes. "Gerald and Victoria in particular will push back on any significant methodology changes." Margaret nods, acknowledging the accurate prediction. Gerald Thornton and Victoria Schuyler, old money representatives on her board, inheritors of family foundations established in the Gilded Age, consistently resist innovations that challenge traditional philanthropic models. "Let them resist," she responds, capping her lipstick. "The world is changing whether they recognize it or not. Our foundation can either evolve or become increasingly irrelevant." Charles smiles at her determination. There's the Margaret Wilson who built a regional family trust into a nationally recognized foundation, formidable as ever. The compliment lands differently than it might have before yesterday's revelations. Formidable isn't always admirable, Charles. Sometimes it's just another word for stubborn adherence to flawed perspectives. And sometimes it's exactly what's needed to drive necessary change, he counters, handing her the portfolio she always carries to board meetings. "Call me after. I want to hear how it goes." Margaret departs through morning mist, her driver navigating the familiar route to the Foundation's offices in downtown Greenwich. The building, a renovated historical property purchased 15 years ago, houses her staff of 22 professionals who manage grant-making, evaluation, communications, and investments. Meredith meets her at the entrance, tablet in hand, expression alert despite the early hour. At 34, her assistant embodies the next generation of philanthropy professionals, diverse in background, educated at elite institutions, committed to both social impact and professional advancement. "Good morning, Margaret. I've gathered everything you requested and restructured the presentation as instructed." The longitudinal studies are particularly fascinating. They show persistent positive correlations between music education and executive function development, even controlling for socioeconomic factors. "Excellent," Margaret acknowledges, accepting the tablet. "And the participant feedback from Chicago? Compiled and highlighted. The qualitative responses are remarkable, stories of transformation, increased confidence, new aspirations. Very powerful material." They enter Margaret's office, a corner space overlooking the town green, walls adorned with artwork from foundation-supported community programs. The contrast between these vibrant, often raw creations and the office's otherwise traditional decor creates an intentional tension, a visual representation of the foundation's position between establishment resources and community needs. "The board is gathering in the conference room," Meredith informs her. "Full attendance today." "Good," Margaret responds, reviewing the updated presentation one final time. "We need everyone on record for these discussions." At precisely 10 o'clock, Margaret enters the boardroom where 12 people sit around a mahogany table. Retired executives, active philanthropists, financial experts, one former state senator, and 2 community representatives added at Margaret's insistence 5 years ago despite resistance from longer-serving members. "Good morning," she greets them, taking her position at the head of the table. "Thank you all for being here. Today's agenda requires significant attention as I'm proposing fundamental changes to our evaluation methodology, particularly for arts education programs. Gerald Thornton, silver-haired, Brooks Brothers attired, third-generation wealth, raises an eyebrow. This wasn't indicated in the pre-meeting materials, Margaret. We were expecting a standard program review. Circumstances have changed, Margaret responds evenly. Sometimes illumination arrives unexpectedly. For the next 40 minutes, Margaret presents her case for transformation, sharing the research Meredith compiled, displaying the qualitative feedback from program participants, and finally, with permission secured via early morning text from Dr. Phillips, showing Marcus's performance video. This young man, Marcus Reynolds, is 15 years old. He's been playing piano since age 4, guided initially by his mother, a professional cellist with the Boston Symphony who died when he was 9. His father, a commercial airline pilot, has supported his musical development since then, including participation in our Chicago program this summer. Margaret pauses, allowing the board to absorb both the performance quality and the personal context. Yesterday, I met Marcus by coincidence. We were seated across from each other in first class on a flight from Chicago to New York. Upon landing, I witnessed him being racially profiled by airport security, questioned about his right to occupy first class despite having a valid ticket and being the son of our pilot. The revelation creates visible discomfort around the table, shifting postures, averted gazes, defensive crossing of arms. This incident forced me to confront uncomfortable truths about access, belonging, and the limitations of our current philanthropic model. While our foundation provided valuable resources through the Chicago program, our evaluation methods fail to capture what actually matters in arts education. Worse, our approach sometimes reinforces the very power dynamics we claim to address. Victoria Schuyler interjects, pearl necklace glinting as she leans forward. Margaret, while this incident is certainly regrettable, I fail to see how it justifies overhauling our entire evaluation framework. Anecdotal experiences, however powerful, shouldn't supersede data-driven decision-making. I agree completely about the importance of data, Margaret counters. But we've been measuring the wrong things. Our metrics prioritize what matters to us as funders, not what creates lasting value for participants. She advances to a slide showing Dr. Phillips's 3 recommended changes: multi-year evaluation timelines, qualitative assessment designed with community input, and involvement of program graduates in both design and implementation. These changes represent the beginning of a necessary evolution. They'll require additional resources, expanded timelines, and a willingness to share power with the communities we serve. But they'll also generate more meaningful insights and ultimately more effective programs. Gerald Thornton shakes his head. This sounds like surrendering objective standards in favor of subjective impressions. How will we justify funding decisions to our donors? By demonstrating real impact rather than convenient metrics, Margaret responds firmly. Our donors deserve authentic assessment, not just comforting numbers. The debate continues for nearly 2 hours, passionate, occasionally tense, fundamentally challenging long-held assumptions about philanthropic practice. Margaret remains steady, neither yielding her position nor attacking those who resist it. This is not about individual blame but systemic change, a distinction she maintains throughout the discussion. Eventually, they reach a compromise, a 6-month pilot of the new evaluation approach for 3 programs including Chicago, with quarterly reports to the board on methodology development and preliminary findings. Not the comprehensive transformation Margaret sought, but a meaningful beginning. As the meeting concludes, Margaret notices several missed calls on her phone, all from an unfamiliar number with a Connecticut area code. She steps into her office to return the call, curious about its persistence. "This is Margaret Wilson," she answers when the call connects. "Mrs. Wilson, this is James Reynolds." The voice is immediately recognizable from the aircraft announcements, confident, measured with subtle warmth beneath professional polish. "I received your message through the airline. You wanted to speak with me?" Margaret sits at her desk, suddenly uncertain despite having initiated this contact. "Yes, Captain Reynolds. Thank you for returning my call. I wanted to follow up after yesterday's incident at the airport." "I see." His tone reveals nothing, neither hostility nor encouragement. "I apologize for not intervening sooner," Margaret continues, choosing directness over diplomacy. "Both during the security confrontation and earlier on the aircraft when I made assumptions about your son that I had no right to make." A brief silence follows, not uncomfortable but evaluative, as though Captain Reynolds is assessing her sincerity. "Marcus mentioned your conversation on the flight," he finally responds. He said you're involved with the foundation that funds his Chicago program. Yes, I'm the executive director of the Wilson Foundation. We've supported the Chicago Youth Symphony Orchestra's outreach initiative for 3 years now. He also said you watched him perform, that you recognized his talent. Any reasonable person would, Margaret acknowledges. Your son is extraordinary, and not just musically. His composure yesterday, his dignity in the face of unwarranted suspicion. That requires character beyond his years. Another pause. Mrs. Wilson, may I speak frankly? Please do. Marcus has encountered situations like yesterday's before, too many times. What made yesterday different wasn't the questioning itself, but seeing how it affected you, someone from outside our experience suddenly confronted with realities we navigate daily. The observation lands precisely. It was illuminating in the worst possible way. For you, perhaps, Captain Reynolds responds. For us, it was Tuesday. The simple statement, devoid of self-pity or accusation, merely factual, shifts something fundamental in Margaret's understanding. What appeared to her as a shocking aberration represents routine experience for the Reynolds family, an ongoing reality they must prepare for, process, and transcend repeatedly. I can't imagine, she admits, and I won't pretend to understand what that's like for your family, but I can tell you it's changing how I approach my foundation's work. Today, I proposed significant changes to our evaluation methodology based partly on my conversation with Marcus. He helped me see the limitations of our current approach. He mentioned that, too, Captain Reynolds acknowledges. He was impressed by your willingness to listen, particularly after your initial interaction. He's perceptive as well as talented, Margaret observes. Captain Reynolds, I'd like to meet with you and Marcus properly, not to ease my conscience or center my experience, but to discuss possibilities for supporting his continued musical development. My foundation is exploring a new fellowship program for exceptional students pursuing pre-college training at institutions like Juilliard or Curtis. The longest silence yet follows this proposal. When Captain Reynolds speaks again, his tone carries new reservation. Mrs. Wilson, I appreciate the gesture, but I need to be clear about something. My son isn't a project or a redemption story. He's a gifted musician who works incredibly hard to develop his talent. We've supported that development through my income, through scholarships he's earned through audition, and yes, through programs like the one your foundation funds. I understand, Margaret responds, recognizing the boundaries being established. Do you? Captain Reynolds challenges gently. Because there's a pattern in philanthropy, identifying exceptional black talent and then framing support as rescue rather than recognition. Marcus doesn't need saving. He needs the same opportunities any equally talented student would receive, without additional burdens of gratitude or representation. The critique is precise, substantive, and entirely fair. Margaret absorbs it without defensiveness. You're absolutely right, and that's exactly the perspective that needs to inform how we restructure our approach, not just for Marcus, but for all participants in our programs. In that case, Captain Reynolds responds, his tone warming slightly, we would be open to a conversation, not about charity, but about genuine opportunity. That's all I'm proposing, Margaret assures him. Recognition of exceptional talent and appropriate support for its development. They arrange to meet the following week at a neutral location, a community music school in Stamford where Marcus sometimes performs in student recitals. The choice feels significant, neither Margaret's privileged territory nor the Reynolds family's private space, but shared ground where music creates connection. As the call concludes, Margaret experiences an emotion she rarely encounters in her professional life, genuine humility. Not the performed humility of acceptance speeches or donor acknowledgments, but the authentic recognition of her limitations, her blind spots, her ongoing need for growth. Meredith appears in the doorway. Ord is leaving, Margaret. Several members mentioned continuing the discussion at next month's meeting. I think you've started something important. We've started something necessary, Margaret corrects gently, and we have much further to go. The remainder of the day passes in focused activity, documentation of the board's decision, communication with Dr. Phillips about the pilot evaluation program, initial research on fellowship structures that honor recipient dignity rather than donor ego. Margaret works with renewed purpose, the discomfort of yesterday's revelations transforming into commitment to meaningful change. Evening finds her once again in the town car heading home, traffic lighter than the previous day, autumn colors more vivid in the afternoon sunlight. Her phone rings, Elizabeth calling from Yale. Mom, Dad said you had some kind of racial awakening yesterday. Are you okay? Margaret laughs despite herself at her daughter's characteristic directness. I'd call it more of a necessary reckoning than an awakening, and yes, I'm fine just processing a lot. Tell me what happened, Elizabeth requests. The unfiltered version, not the sanitized one Dad probably got. Margaret shares the complete story. Her initial assumptions about Marcus, their conversation on the flight, the security confrontation, her belated intervention, the subsequent reflection and board meeting. Elizabeth listens without interruption, a rarity for her passionately engaged personality. When Margaret finishes, her daughter's response surprises her. "I'm proud of you, Mom." "For what?" Margaret asks, genuinely curious. "For finally noticing injustices that have been ongoing for generations, for taking initial steps toward changes that should have happened years ago. For being willing to learn," Elizabeth clarifies. "For using your position to drive change once you understood the need for it." Do you know how many people in your generation and position would have rationalized that airport incident, would have told themselves it was unfortunate but not their problem to solve? The perspective shift is unexpected, grace from the quarter where Margaret most anticipated criticism. "I still have so much to learn, to unlearn." "Everyone does," Elizabeth acknowledges. "The question is whether we're willing to do the work. You are, that matters." The conversation continues as the car approaches Greenwich. Mother and daughter connecting across generational perspectives, finding common ground in commitment to growth despite different starting points. By the time Margaret arrives home, she feels strangely lightened despite the weight of yesterday's revelations and today's confrontations. Charles greets her with uncharacteristic enthusiasm. "You'll never believe who called the house line looking for you." Margaret raises an eyebrow, setting down her portfolio. "The foundation has multiple contact numbers. It must have been important." "It wasn't foundation business," Charles clarifies. "It was Marcus Reynolds, the boy from your flight. Apparently his school is holding a recital next month featuring selections from their summer programs. He wanted to invite us personally." The unexpected gesture touches Margaret deeply. "Did you get the details?" Charles hands her a neatly written message with date, time, and location. "I took the liberty of accepting, assuming you'd want to attend. I hope that was appropriate." "More than appropriate," Margaret confirms, studying the information. "It's a beginning." 1 month later, Margaret and Charles enter the Greenwich Academy auditorium where students from various summer music programs are showcasing their accomplishments. The space buzzes with anticipation, proud parents, siblings, extended family members creating that particular energy unique to student performances. Margaret notices Captain Reynolds immediately, his height making him visible even in the crowded space. He stands with twin girls Margaret recognizes from Marcus's descriptions, their excitement evident in animated gestures as they converse with audience members. She approaches carefully, conscious of boundaries of not assuming welcome beyond what's been explicitly offered. "Captain Reynolds, Margaret and Charles Wilson, thank you for the invitation." He turns, recognition flickering across his features. "Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Wilson, thank you for coming. These are my daughters, Zoe and Chloe." The girls offer polite greetings, their resemblance to both their father and brother evident in their features, their poised demeanor. "Marcus is backstage, probably practicing until the last possible moment," Captain Reynolds explains with affectionate exasperation. "He's performing last tonight, the featured piece." "We look forward to hearing him play," Charles responds warmly. "Margaret has shared his video performance with me. Extraordinary talent." Captain Reynolds' expression softens with parental pride. "He works incredibly hard. The Chicago program was transformative for him, challenging him technically while building confidence in his interpretive choices." "I'm delighted to hear that," Margaret responds. "Our foundation has committed to continuing support for the program with expanded evaluation timelines and methodology changes based on participant input." The conversation pauses as an announcement requests audience members to take their seats. Captain Reynolds gestures toward the front rows. "We saved seats in our section if you'd like to join us. No obligation, of course." The invitation, simple yet significant, represents a bridge between worlds that might otherwise remain separated by privilege, by assumption, by systematic sorting of who belongs where. Margaret accepts with genuine gratitude, following the Reynolds family to their seats. The recital proceeds with the familiar rhythm of student performances, varying skill levels, nervous energy, occasional technical mishaps met with supportive applause. Margaret observes the audience as much as the performers, parents leaning forward during their children's pieces, siblings alternately bored and bursting with pride, music teachers nodding in professional assessment. Finally, the last performance is announced. Marcus Reynolds, piano. Johann Sebastian Bach's Partita No. 2 in C minor. Marcus appears from the wings, his formal attire emphasizing his transition from boy to young man. He approaches the piano with measured steps, adjusts the bench with precise movements, and sits with perfect posture. the ritual preparation Margaret recognizes from the video performance, now witnessed in person. He begins to play and the auditorium falls completely silent. The music fills the space, complex, mathematical, emotional, transcendent. Margaret watches his hands moving across the keyboard with both technical precision and interpretive courage, bringing centuries-old notes to vibrant life. This is not merely performance but communication, Marcus speaking through Bach, adding his voice to a conversation spanning generations. Beside her, Captain Reynolds watches his son with naked pride, the twins leaning forward in their seats, completely absorbed. Margaret glimpses the ghost of Corinne Reynolds in this family tableau, the professional musician mother whose legacy continues through her son's gift, whose absence shapes but doesn't define their present. As the final notes resonate through the auditorium, a moment of perfect silence follows, that sacred pause between performance and response when art's impact is most palpable. Then applause erupts, the audience rising in spontaneous standing ovation. Marcus bows, humble yet confident, acknowledging the recognition without being defined by it. His eyes find his family in the front row, a small smile breaking through his serious performance demeanor. In this moment, Margaret understands with perfect clarity what her foundation's metrics have failed to capture: the immeasurable value of artistic expression, of cultural inheritance, of excellence pursued for its own sake rather than external validation. The transformative power of music to connect across time, across difference, across the artificial boundaries humans create to separate themselves from one another. As Marcus exits the stage to continued applause, Captain Reynolds turns to Margaret, extending his hand. "Thank you for coming. It means a great deal to him that you're here." Margaret accepts the handshake, understanding it represents not conclusion but commencement, the beginning of a relationship based on mutual respect rather than philanthropic hierarchy. "The honor is entirely ours. Your son's gift deserves to be heard by the widest possible audience." The formal language barely contains the emotion beneath it. Margaret's genuine wonder at Marcus's talent, her deepening commitment to creating systems that recognize and nurture such gifts, without imposing additional burdens of gratitude or performance of neediness. As the auditorium empties, families gathering their performers, conversations flowing around shared experience, Margaret observes the Reynolds family surrounded by well-wishers. Marcus accepting congratulations with the same dignified grace he demonstrated during the airport confrontation, his sisters alternately teasing and praising him, Captain Reynolds maintaining subtle supportive presence. They belong here completely, not because Margaret's foundation provided opportunity, not because Captain Reynolds achieved professional success that supports his family's pursuits, but because talent, dedication, and excellence create their own belonging regardless of external validation or permission. This fundamental truth, so obvious yet so frequently obscured by systems designed to control access rather than recognize merit, has transformed Margaret's understanding of her foundation's purpose. Not to bestow opportunity as benevolent gatekeepers, but to dismantle barriers that prevent natural talents from finding their fullest expression. The transformation isn't complete, either in Margaret's thinking or her foundation's practices. The pilot evaluation program faces ongoing challenges, resistance from traditional philanthropic perspectives, the messy reality of institutional change. The fellowship program for exceptional students remains in development, its structure continuously refined to center recipient dignity rather than donor recognition. But something essential has shifted, in Margaret personally, in her foundation's approach, in the relationship between funder and community. A hierarchy has been questioned, a perspective expanded, a journey of genuine partnership initiated. As Margaret and Charles prepare to depart, Marcus approaches, performance adrenaline still evident in his bright eyes, his slightly accelerated speech. "Mrs. Wilson, Mr. Wilson, thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for inviting us," Margaret responds sincerely. "Your performance was extraordinary, Marcus." He accepts the compliment with a brief nod. "I've been working with Dr. Phillips on the evaluation committee for your foundation's pilot program. It's been interesting seeing philanthropy from the inside." "And what have you observed?" Margaret asks, genuinely curious about his perspective. Marcus considers the question seriously. "That good intentions aren't enough without structural change, but also that change is possible when people are willing to listen and adapt." The assessment, mature beyond his years, balanced in its critique and acknowledgement, confirms Margaret's initial impression of this remarkable young man. Not just talented but perceptive, not just accomplished but wise. I hope you'll continue providing that perspective, she responds. We need your voice in these conversations. Captain Reynolds joins them, the twins already heading toward the exit with their father's car keys. Marcus has strong opinions about most things, he comments with affectionate pride. Always has. A valuable quality when paired with the thoughtfulness he demonstrates, Charles observes, entering the conversation with genuine engagement rather than polite obligation. The four stand together briefly, not quite friends, not merely acquaintances, but connected through circumstance, through shared commitment to excellence, through a transformative encounter that altered multiple trajectories. We should let you celebrate as a family, Margaret acknowledges, preparing to depart. But Marcus, we look forward to hearing you play again, perhaps at Juilliard pre-college next year. Marcus glances at his father, some private communication passing between them. We're exploring options, Captain Reynolds confirms, including your Foundation's fellowship program, which appears thoughtfully structured. Designed with input from students like Marcus, Margaret explains, as all our programs will be moving forward. The exchange concludes with handshakes, with genuine wishes for continued connection, with the promise of paths that will intersect again through shared commitment to artistic excellence and meaningful opportunity. As Margaret and Charles exit into the cool autumn evening, the stars visible above Greenwich's carefully maintained historical district, she reflects on the journey that began with an uncomfortable encounter on an airplane, how a moment of confrontation created possibility for transformation, how questioning long-held assumptions opened space for new understanding. You know, Charles observes as they walk toward their car, in 40 years of marriage, I've watched you build something remarkable with the Foundation. But I think what you're doing now might be your most important work yet. Margaret considers his assessment, feeling its truth resonate. It's also the most challenging. Changing systems is harder than creating them initially. But necessary, Charles acknowledges, and long overdue. Margaret pauses, looking back at the auditorium where light still spills from windows, where families continue celebrating their children's accomplishments, where music created momentary community across difference. What happened on that flight meeting Marcus, witnessing the airport confrontation, it changed me, she admits. Not in a single dramatic moment, but in an ongoing way that keeps revealing new dimensions of privilege I never had to consider before. And what will you do with that awareness? Charles asks, not challenging but curious. Margaret considers the question seriously. Continue the work of transformation, personal and institutional. Listen more than I speak. Share power rather than simply exercising it. Recognize excellence wherever it appears, regardless of packaging. They resume walking, Margaret's heels clicking against historic cobblestones laid centuries ago by hands whose stories remain largely untold in Greenwich's official histories. It won't be easy, Charles cautions. The board remains divided. Some donors will resist changes to evaluation metrics they've grown comfortable with. The old systems have powerful defenders. Let them resist, Margaret responds with quiet determination. The future belongs to approaches that recognize the full humanity of every participant, that measure what actually matters rather than what's conveniently quantifiable. As they reach their car, German engineering, subtle luxury, the material manifestation of privilege that once seemed neutral but now appears laden with significance, Margaret pauses once more. Marcus doesn't need my help to succeed, she acknowledges. He has extraordinary talent, a supportive family, and his own fierce determination. What he needs, what all the students in our programs need, is a world that doesn't place additional obstacles in their path based on race or background. A world that recognizes excellence without qualification or surprise. And your foundation can help create that world? Charles asks. Not alone, Margaret acknowledges, but in partnership with the communities we serve, with leaders like Dr. Phillips, with families like the Reynolds. Yes, we can contribute meaningfully to that transformation. They drive home through familiar streets rendered new through altered perspective, the exclusive shops, the historic homes, the carefully maintained boundaries between Greenwich and less affluent neighboring communities. All of it visible now as constructed rather than natural, as choices rather than inevitabilities. The evening concludes where this journey began, in their beautiful home with its imported marble and museum-quality artwork, its symbols of achievement and belonging, its embodiment of privilege both earned and inherited. Yet Margaret moves through these spaces differently now, seeing them through expanded awareness of who is missing, whose voices remain unheard, what talents go unrecognized when access depends on permission rather than merit. This awareness doesn't diminish her appreciation for beauty, for excellence, for the life she and Charles have built together. Instead, It deepens her commitment to creating systems where such appreciation extends beyond traditional boundaries, where excellence is recognized wherever it appears, where belonging expands rather than contracts. As she prepares for sleep, Margaret's thoughts return to Marcus at the piano, his focused expression, his disciplined posture, his hands moving with both technical precision and emotional intelligence across the keyboard. Creating beauty that transcends category, that speaks across difference, that connects rather than divides. In this image lies the essence of transformation, personal and institutional, individual and systemic. The recognition that excellence deserves recognition without qualification, that talent creates its own belonging, that meaningful change begins with seeing clearly what previously remained comfortably obscured. Tomorrow brings new challenges, continued resistance from board members, complex logistics of program redesign, the messy reality of institutional evolution. But tonight, Margaret rests in the certainty that the path forward, while difficult, is unmistakably clear. Not charity, but justice. Not permission, but recognition. Not isolated success stories, but transformed systems that make such stories unremarkable rather than exceptional. In the quiet darkness of Greenwich night, this commitment settles into determination, the kind that sustains lengthy journeys, that weathers inevitable resistance, that measures progress not in comfortable metrics but in genuine transformation. A journey that began with an uncomfortable encounter on an airplane and continues with each choice to see clearly, to listen deeply, to change meaningfully, rippling outward from personal awakening to institutional evolution to societal transformation. This is Margaret Wilson's work now. Not finished but beginning. Not perfect but purposeful. Not isolated but connected to countless other journeys toward justice unfolding across communities, institutions, and individual lives. In the morning, she will continue. If you've made it to the end of this powerful story, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and share your thoughts in the comments below. Did this story change your perspective on privilege and assumptions? Have you witnessed or experienced similar situations in your own life? Your engagement helps us continue creating content that matters, stories that challenge, inspire, and connect us across our differences. Thank you for joining us on this journey.